Hey everyone, Zach from Labaki here, and in this video we're going to be talking about UI, user interface, buttons, graphics. How does the user actually navigate and interact in our VR experience? Well, that all starts with some graphics, some 2D graphics that we can use for buttons or menus or whatever we may need. And so I'm going to start off here in Illustrator. And we're going to make some button graphics. There are a number of other programs just like Illustrator that you can use, and all of them effectively do the same thing. As long as you can make the graphic that you want to use as your button, doesn't really matter which program you use, but we'll go through just some basic making of the graphics and talk about the pipeline for getting them from 2D graphics and imported into Unity, how to set them up so they are optimized and get them to actually do what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and start with just a blank document, and I'm building a VR experience where really all I need right now is a start button and a reset button. So for my start button, I just want kind of a generic framed button with the word start inside. So I am going to make this rectangle 4 inches wide by 2 inches tall, and those exact dimensions and proportions, we'll talk about why we're choosing those in specific a little bit later. But here's a rectangle. I'm gonna give it just a little bit of curve to make it look nice and friendly in VR. And let's offset that inward. If we do a negative value, that will offset our shape inward. There we go. We lost some of our curve a little bit. Let's just add that back to it. And we've got these nice little handles on the inside of our shapes that if we just click and drag, we can change that bevel. All right, super simple. I have two rectangles, an outer one and an inner one. We'll let this inner one be white, and for this outer one I've got some orange accents in my VR experience, so we'll just set this to a nice orange. And let me go ahead and just get rid of the black stroke. I've got my stroke selected here for both of these. We'll set it to none. There we go. Very simple, straightforward frame. I may be tempted to add my text now that says start, but I'm actually not going to do that in here. I'm going to use the text tools that are built into Unity that are far more optimized for making things render crisply and cleanly in VR. So we'll just save this as a nice blank generic flexible frame that we can use for whatever buttons we want in the future. So let's go ahead and group that. That is one thing that we can export. And I mentioned a reset button as well. Let's take the same style, but instead of a rectangle, let's just have it be a square. So I know that this is 4 by 2. We want to make it 2 by 2. So I'm just going to do a direct select on these vertices over here, and we want to move it by -2, and 0 in the vertical direction. Okay, there we go. That is a super simple square. Now for a reset, I like to do just a simple visual indicator, like a circle with some arrows, kind of like the recycle symbol. So let's go ahead and make that real quick. I'm going to do an ellipse, essentially a circle, and let's make that have a stroke, a line with some thickness, and we'll kind of divide it in half for right now. We'll have an arrowhead here, and then rotate this whole thing and have an arrowhead over here. So just to make sure our arrowheads don't get in the way, I'm going to cut off a portion of this. There we go. We'll just delete that. Awesome. We've got our portion of a circle here. Let's go into stroke. We'll make it rounded. Again, I think that's just a little bit more VR friendly. And we'll add an arrowhead. Whoa, okay, that is way too big. Let's scale that down to like 25%. Awesome, love it. And let's see, that's still kind of pointy and jagged right now. Let's go to Object, Path, Outline Stroke, and now these are enclosed shapes that I can actually edit. So, we'll add a little bit of curves there and join those together. Now, we want to rotate this. And let me find the center. We'll just put a little placeholder circle there for the center. We want to rotate this 180 degrees about that center, and we want to do a copy rotate. There we go. That's reset evoking. Let's make these a different color. Blue contrasts nicely with orange. Something like that. Awesome. Okay. Is this a group? That is not a group. There we go. Now, another thing that I like to do for buttons in Unity is to give them just a little bit of additional interaction. When you point at them, I want to know that I'm pointing at them. I want to know that it's highlighted or it's pressed or it's grayed out. So I'm going to make some variations of both of these. Let's make some copies here. And whenever I highlight these buttons, whenever I point at them, before I click them, maybe I want them to turn a different color. Let's do like a golden color, something like that. And then, we can get a little creative with this as well. Maybe we want our reset arrows to rotate just a little bit whenever we point at them. Just indicating that there is something that will happen here whenever you are pointing at this button. All right, we've got our idle state, we've got our highlighted state, and I like to do one more for when it's actually selected or when it's grayed out. So what I like to do for that, I'll just set the frames back to their original color, and we just want to gray these out a little bit. And I think the fastest way to do that will be, we'll just grab that frame. Just want that outer rectangle, that outer square. We'll make it a white square and give it maybe 60% opacity. And now if we just overlay this, there we go, that's kind of grayed out. Do the same thing here. Just steal that color, set it to 60. Boom, okay. This will be our start button with its 3 different states. This will be our reset button with its 3 different states. Let's make sure we save this first of all. And let's start exporting these graphics. So within Illustrator, I can select each one of these, and I'm going to hit Export Selection. I've got a keyboard shortcut set up for this, so let me go ahead and just get all of these onto our export panel. Awesome. Let's name these. We'll call this Reset Idle, Reset Highlighted, Reset Selected. We'll just call this a generic frame, frame idle, frame highlighted, and frame selected. All right, we will select all of these assets, and let's make sure our background color is set to transparent. Alrighty, good stuff. That put them in a folder, and there we go. We've got our buttons, we've got our transparency in the background. But now the next thing that we need to talk about is the size, the actual pixel size of these graphics. These exported, for some reason it added an extra pixel on there. We're at 300 pixels per inch, and so at 2 inches all around, that gives us 600 by 600 pixels. Sometimes Illustrator does some weird stuff and adds that extra pixel, and that can be kind of annoying, but we have a super handy tool that will let us just resize these graphics to whatever we want. It is called bulk resize. You can just access it in a web browser. And so I am just going to grab the square graphics first. And we're going to set the image dimensions to a very specific number. We're going to set them to 512 by 512. Now, why 512? Well, 512 is a power of 2. And Unity and game engines in general love powers of 2 when it comes to compression. They can do all sorts of crazy math with some compression algorithms to make those files take up very little space if the image dimensions are a power of 2. So in our case, we have squares, so we'll just set them to 512 by 512. We'll make sure that they are PNGs with transparency preserved. We'll hit start, and those are all zipped up nicely for us. Let's do our rectangles. Now, you'll recall I made those rectangles 2 by 4, so 512 should be our height, and our width should be 2 times that. So 2 times that, still a power of 2, 1024. All right, so we've got those exported. I'm just going to take these zip files and we're going to bring them over to Unity and drag them in our UI folder and start setting things up. See you over there. And just like that, we are over here in Unity. So I've got this little project here that I've been working on, and this is the activity that needs the start and the reset button. So I've got a little UI folder that I've made in the project hierarchy, and we're just going to grab those images that we just made into that folder. We've got them down in our project folder now, all 6 of them, 3 for each one. And you can see, check out how compressed those are, right? We can see that it says compressed because they are powers of 2. So let's select all of those, and we want to set the texture type to sprite, 2D and UI. That will let them actually be used as graphics for UI buttons. And that makes a little file that gets nested under each one that is the actual sprite file getting used. So there we go. We've got all of our sprites, and let's actually start setting up our UI. So the first thing that we need when we're making UI is what we call a canvas. If we right click, we can go to the UI tab and select canvas, and the canvas is basically where we're going to put all of our stuff. And by default, they're really big because Unity thinks that we want to have a screen overlay is the default setting. And so we're actually going to change that to world space. We want to be able to control where this is positioned in the world. We're going to get rid of that scaler. We don't need that. And we can set our own scale right there. And like I said, these are huge, right? So we're going to set them to like 0.001. And, it's centered way off in space as well. So let's go ahead and set that to the origin. And there we go. We have our little properly sized canvas. next to our activity. And we can set the width and height to whatever we want specifically here. I'm just going to do 1,000 just to keep it easy. And let's rotate it. We'll put it up against this wall. Now, this is super important. This blue arrow aligns with the direction that you're looking at the canvas, right? So you want to be looking into the canvas. Your eyes want to follow that blue arrow. If that blue arrow is pointing at you, it's going to be backwards. So one other component we need to add to our canvas is what we call a tracked device graphic raycaster. And all that does is it lets us point and click with our little pointy clicky line. And we also need to set it to UI, the UI layer. And all the systems will pretty much take care of the rest of it. So we've got our canvas, it is scaled properly, it's got our script that will let us point, and we will add a button. We went to UI, Legacy, and Button. And let's go ahead and name this the Start button. I like to include button in the names of all of the things that are buttons, just to keep it nice and straightforward. And we can set the width and height, just like we did on the canvas. You can drag those or type in specific values. And so this is just Unity's generic default button, and it's got some text that sits underneath it as well. Now, that is just the old Unity text system, and then the button itself is just an image, essentially, and we can change what color we want that to be set to, just with that color picker right there. But let's go ahead and start putting our sprites on there. We'll set the idle to the source image, and we've got weird dimensions right now. We want to set the width and height to the actual image dimensions of the sprite. So 1024 by 512, those powers of 2. That's a little too big, so we'll scale it down to, I guess, half that scale. That'll be fine. All right. And what about those other sprites that we made? Those other highlighted and selected versions? Well, the way that we actually get those to work is if we go to the button, Unity has a system called Sprite Swap. So if we are pointing at the button, it'll enter the highlighted mode and use the highlighted sprite. If we click on it, it'll enter the pressed state and we can use the selected. So I like to just follow this pattern of highlighted, selected. And notice if we make it non-interactable, it makes it disabled, and that's our selected sprite. All right, let's look at the text in here. This default text is horrible. It is super grainy, and we don't want to use that system. We're going to delete that. And we're going to go to UI and Text Mesh Pro. Text Mesh Pro, instead of rendering it as just grainy text, it's going to actually make it be a vector graphic. So we can zoom in all the way on that and it will not get fuzzy. So let's center that. And we change that to black text as well so we can actually see it. Let's set our text bounds. We'll just type in some numbers instead of clicking and dragging on those. We can set this to be however big or small makes sense. That'll work just to get us started. And let's set our text to auto size so it'll just fill that bound that we give it. And it's a start button. We want it to say start. We'll make that height a little bit bigger so the word can be a bit taller. And, just refining those sizes a bit. We can make it bold, we can make it italic, we can make it underlined or struck through. We can make it all lowercase or all caps or small caps. We love Text Mesh Pro. It has so many options. And we're going to set it to a font that we like to use for a lot of our systems. And there we go. That's a start button. We just used our generic frame and added some text. And I'm going to go ahead and rename that text to say text start. And the reason is I like to have all my text have the word text in it. So I can just search for text and see anything that is text. And like I was showing earlier with the button, if all of our buttons are named button, we can just search for button and see all the buttons. Staying organized is very convenient for your future self. Okay, let's make this button do something. Actually, before we do that, let's we'll go ahead and make it do something. Yeah, we'll add this event here in our on-click section, and we will just use this little thing that we've got going right now that controls our procedure. We'll dive more into how that works in another video, but really we are just telling this button on click, start this procedure, but you can have that button do whatever event you want it to do. Okay, let's go ahead and set up our reset button as well, and we'll just go through that same process all over again. We'll set our dimensions to 512 and 512. We had set that scale on the first one to be half, and we'll just delete that text. We don't need that. And then we will grab our reset sprites. And just like we did before, we're gonna do highlighted and selected and highlighted and selected. Nice. Oh, set that to sprite swap. Perfect. Okay, and we'll set up our event for when we click it. And there's just a reset option on this little script that we're using, so we'll just set it to that. Awesome. Okay, let's save our work and let's jump in the headset and see where things are at right now. I've got my headset tied to the computer, and so we'll just click play, jump in here, and here we are in VR, and there's our pointy line. When we point at things, they highlight. That's working well. And you can see our little animation.
Today, we'll be using this hammer to nail these two planks of wood together. To begin, grab the plank
that seems to be working just fine. We click on start.
Today, we'll be using this hammer to nail these two planks of wood together.
We click on reset, and it resets. That is doing exactly what we want it to do. All right, let's come back into Unity, and I'm going to show you one other fun little trick that we can do with buttons. Let's pretend that we want to use this reset button as a rotate button. Kind of looks like we could, spin something around with this. So maybe we want to spin around that block of metal. I'm going to make a copy of this button and just kind of move it down there by that block of metal, put it on the table. And we want to add something called an event trigger. And the event trigger will basically give us different options for if we click and hold on something, that's a pointer down event. When we release, that's a pointer up event. So we could click and hold on this button and make this block rotate. So let me go ahead and just make a super quick rotation animation for this block. Make an animations folder just to stay organized. Rotate block. All right, that'll work. And there's our block. Our starting keyframe with rotation at 0. Our ending keyframe with rotation at 360. So it goes in a circle. Awesome. Now that's kind of weird looking. It doesn't ease in, ease out, but we want this to just be a looping rotation. So we'll set these to linear. We'll make that just nice and straightforward. And let's make it take a little bit longer too. And so now that will just be a perfect loop of this block rotating around in a circle. So one more quick thing before we tie it into our button. We need to make it to where this thing isn't always playing. We'll just add a blank idle animation state, set that as default. And there's our other clip, our rotate block clip. And let's tell this button to play it. So on pointer down, when we click, we want to talk to the block that has the rotation component. And we want to tell its animator to play a clip. We're going to pass in the string of that clip name. which is rotate block. Just copy and paste it. And we want that to play at full speed. So we're going to type in the number 1 for 100% full speed. And when we release the button, all we want to do is just tell that speed to stop, go to 0. So pointer down, when we click on it and we're holding it, the speed is 1, it's playing its rotation. Pointer up, we've let go, the speed is 0. Let's see if that works. Hey, look at that. All right, that is working very well. I click and hold my trigger, that is the pointer down event, and it plays the animation. And as soon as I let up, that's the pointer up event, it pauses it. So that is another way that you can use buttons to do some cool stuff in Unity. So very basic overview just into the world of UI, making graphics, having them do something, having them be the appropriate dimensions to make sure they're actually optimized and can get compressed. There is so much that you can do with UI. And I have only shown you, the surface of what's possible. This is the way that I like to set things up, with the framed buttons and using the text and using the sprite swaps. But like I said, there are a million ways that you could do this. UI is a great way to dive in and just kind of find your own style, the way that you like to do things, or the way that makes sense for the game or the project that you're developing. You have a lot of control over the look and feel of a project through the UI, and good UI versus bad UI can really make or break an experience for the user. I'm sure you can think of plenty of times where you have used a program where the UI was just clunky and bad and unintuitive. So UI is great to be able to put some thought into and really kind of customize your project to be exactly what you want it to be. So we will end there for this video. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.